Hi, babushka. I had to go for a walk. I talked to you yesterday, and it was great hearing from you, texting and whatnot. It's so good to hear from you. It seems like every moment that you might reach out to me, it's so precious. I told you I was going to make a second part of a video concerning my dealings with Eddy, your uncle. And I may have to do another part of it because it manifested into something that I was trying to explain to your grandfather. Yeah, my dad. I loved him, but it took a lot to put a crack in this crab on this situation. And this part of it is going to be a little bit scary. I was arguing with my dad big time at this point. It was after that time, I jumped out of the car and went for, walking away from the car, and my dad chasing me down, begging me to come in and to calm down and to forget about it. But I just couldn't. I was thinking about 1984 and 1985. I was also thinking about my friend Rudy. When I think of the music from Rod Stewart here, and I think of that song, having to do with Georgie Boy, it makes me think of Raul. He was a wonderful person. And he was older than me. He was about 4 years older. His family had moved to that small town in Humbleton. And he was born in Tijuana. He had a younger brother. He did not have a father that I knew of. It just wasn't even mentioned. And after a while, his English started to improve. His English was pretty broken when he first moved there. Not only did he have a hard time fitting in because he was effeminate, and he was also very intelligent, but he worked really hard to improve his English over time. It was very different visiting his house. His house was actually a huge 2-story, rented, and it was near that special cousin of mine I told you about, whose father was a stockbroker, my special cousin, and his young brother Josh was there, who was just a year younger than me. And I tended to steer a little bit toward Rudy because we were comfortable around each other, and he could talk about the things that he liked around me without having to feel ridiculed or criticized. He could be himself. And it was great because he was really into fashion, and some of the Mexican girls in the neighborhood or outside the neighborhood, they would come and visit his mom. And that was kind of the dawning of me trying to look a little bit more, effeminate myself, and learning how to do my hair. I had no idea. And it was comforting too, because this was the time when your grandmother, Sarah, my mother, was really, really ill. And it was also the climax of the time of abuse. It was wonderful, though. It was a wonderful escape for me. It was an odd house, though, because some women from out of town would visit often, and it seemed like sometimes they would spend the night there. There was more than one bedroom, and his mom seemed to take care of them and do things for them. What I didn't realize, because there were two bars in Humbleton, two taverns. There was one for the farmers, for my relatives. And then across the street, there was also another bar, the Roundup Inn, and it was mostly clientele of Mexican men, especially Mexican immigrants. It was owned and ran by a white lady, and her son, they lived up above the bar. But I noticed, and my brothers noticed, and it was kind of an inside joke. There were two vans often parked outside that tavern. And the boys and the people, they figured it out. There were prostitutes who came in that van, and they would do whatever they had to do with those guys, those Mexican immigrants. They're a mixture of Caucasian and Mexican women. And my brothers would oftentimes, especially Eddy, would have something horrible to say about Rudy and about Josh and about their mom. And I remember hanging out with Rudy one day, and we were listening not only to Rod Stewart, but we were also listening to a boy band, very popular, Menudo. That's, where Ricky Martin got his start. It was one of the first really successful boy bands ever. Rudy had a poster of them, and he had a crush, of course, on Ricky Martin. Who wouldn't? But I asked him, I wanted to know what was going on in the neighborhood, why those women, visited. I didn't mind, I didn't see anything horrible or any danger there. They seemed very comfortable, and it was a quiet environment. And he explained to me that his mom helped them. She was kind of like their madam in a way, and that was a resting spot for them to get cleaned up and to get everything they needed together and continue on and survive. It was a wonderful house, wonderfully decorated. They didn't have a lot of money, but they were happy. And anyways, I grew up with a lot of things that were said in my family from my brothers. They would judge people immediately and would always have some kind of yucky joke. Yeah. When I think of Georgie Boy, when I think of Rod Stewart, I do think of Rudy. And I think of you too, because you always loved his music. And I sent that scrapbook that you had put together when you were little. I added stuff to it for you. And one of the things I added was a balloon that I carefully deflated. And it has, Rod Stewart, his name on it. Is white with black lettering. And you remember that balloon, don't you? You were about 8 years old when me and my husband at the time, we took you to go see him in concert. You wouldn't stop talking about how you wanted him to sing you Maggie May. And that's all we could think about in the car. And we sang it in the car. And when he did, you were enraptured. And it was so much fun. It wasn't just adults there. A lot of families, a lot of adults brought their children. And it was very heartwarming, as at, I believe, the Paramount in Seattle. A wonderful, wonderful place to go see a concert. And I remember toward the end, with one of his final songs, and I remember this so well, you fill my heart with gladness, take away all my sadness, you ease my troubles, that's what you do. You went up toward the front of the stage because all the balloons were falling. And I remember he saw you and he waved hello to you. And as a balloon was falling down, he tapped it toward you and you caught it. What a wonderful memory. You were so excited. I think you were saying you weren't going to wash your hand. Eventually you did. But yeah, those were good memories and good music. It's great. When I think of that song, that little ditty I just sang, oftentimes I think of you. And when you listen to that, you can think of me too. And all the people that you grew up with, that you came to love. But let's go back to this time. I was going to put out this video yesterday, but yeah, we were texting and talking, and you were talking about how you felt tired because this is a new job, and you have a lot to do, and a lot to learn, a lot on your plate, plus you haven't been working for a while, and I can understand that. With the pandemic and everything, it's kind of thrown everybody off. It's just been awful. And with my vacation, I've gotten some things done. But I've been sleeping, and I tried to switch my sleep schedule to days, and it just hasn't worked out. And then I started coming down with a cold, and I had to fight that. And it's good. I've gotten a lot of rest. That's a good thing. Oh gosh, my last vacation, I believe it was in March. It was supposed to be a 2-week thing, but I changed it to a week because of the height of the pandemic and all the goings on at my store and people buying everything. I think before I went on vacation, I was working 80 hours, and that lasted for like a few weeks because my lead prior to my vacation, he was on his, It was awful. So that vacation, all I did was sleep. All I did was sleep and eat. And I actually burned myself on the stove. I still have a scar from it, from making a plate of lasagna. Get that. So with this one, I've been using this time to reflect and think on things and get things done. Take some time for me. But oh, that time. Let's go back. As Rudy was learning to improve his English, I was desperately wanting to improve my reading skills. It was the worst time for me. That was the time that I had that pony I told you about, Giddy Up Go. And then with Mom being ill, and I think this was the time that she had her heart attack. Yeah, it was. It was toward the end of the summer. I gotta really focus on this. Do you remember those childcraft books that you grew up with that used to belong to me? I still have them. I practiced with them when I was young, continuously. They came with a set of brand new World Book encyclopedias that my dad had ordered, and he specially wanted me to have these. Eddy, he read through these too, but they bored him. But for me to have them at home, because we didn't have computers back then, we didn't have any of that. We were lucky enough to have a regular television. But I could study these at home and really concentrate on these poems and fairy tales. I had to learn at some point because I was so dyslexic and I didn't even realize what that was. I had to learn to make sure that the letters stayed put, because when you're dyslexic, it's hard to focus on things. Things end up backwards or upside down. And I remember literally seeing letters jump off the page, it seemed like. But I was getting better at it, and I was able to read chapter books by the time I was about 12 here. A book or a set of books in particular were the Lewis Carroll books that I got interested in. I had read Alice in Wonderland. Fantastic, fantastic tales. Just a whirlwind. And reading crazy stuff like that, crazy tales, it actually helped my brain focus and process things. And then I went on to Alice in the Looking Glass. There's a poem in that book that I think relates to the situation that I'm going to tell you about. It was a turning point in my childhood, and it was something that I had to really, really just put in my dad's face, because when the situation happened, he was out of town. I don't think he was at the local tavern. I think he was out in Salem or a bigger town, out with his friends. And it was a time when I needed someone, but I was very alone. Look at Gus here. He's been so glad that I've been home. And you can think that he's barricading himself, trying to protect this turtle here from the monsters. So funny. But let's get into this. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toes did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mumsy were the borogroves, and the morass outgrabe. Beware the jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jubjub bird, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the magscombe foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-tum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as an uffish thought he stood, the jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the culgry wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He went galumping back. And hast thou slain the jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O fabious day, Callooh Callay. He cheffled in his joy. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mommy wrasse outgrave. So that poem is about a monster. And that story has to do with a mirror. When I think about this moment, I think about that book. And I also think about a huge, huge mirror. It was above the fireplace, and it had a gold frame. There was an evening, like I said, when Dad was out of town, and it was Eddy, Jack, and I. At first, Jack wasn't home. Eddy and I were up late watching television. And then I was reading my books while watching the TV. Just kind of wanted that noise, wanted that quiet, as in the living room. And I remember glancing over at the fireplace. It wasn't lit, but oftentimes I would stare into that big mirror. So if you imagine a mirror, but huge, it was giant. Maybe half the size, actually, of this little couch here. Our doors were old-fashioned. They required skeleton keys. And if you didn't have a skeleton key to lock it, to use, oftentimes we would take the doorknob and we would take one doorknob off the other side. And then that way you could use that little knob. And if you took it out after you closed it, there was no other way for somebody to get in. So you could have your privacy. We only had a few skeleton keys, and I did not have access to any of them. So when locking a door, I would do that little doorknob trick, or I would use a chair to keep the door locked. Eddy was up to something. Like I told you in a previous video, our rooms were upstairs at this time, all three of us. Eddy's bedroom was an area called an alcove, and it was really weird. He didn't even have a curtain. You could see his stuff, blah, blah, blah. It's like every time I would have to go up to my room, he'd be there. I didn't like it. But Jack's room, on the other hand, he always kept it locked. And he always kept, his cool stuff in it. Eddy looked up to Jack. Eddy wanted to be like Jack. Jack was perfect. He had a photographic memory in mind. His grades were almost perfect. He was very good at sports. And I think the previous year, his football team had won championship, and he was the linebacker. They were actually on the cover of some of the major newspapers there in Oregon. It was a very exciting thing. Later on that night, as I'm continuing reading, this must have been after midnight and on a weekend, Jack came home. Eddy was in bed, and I was getting ready to go to bed. But immediately, Jack transformed into the monster and went after Eddy. Now, I don't know if you remember visiting that old house with me. Once in a while we would. And maybe you remember that large mirror above the old fireplace. And maybe you remember that leather strap that hung on the side of the fireplace. And that was near your grandfather John's little love couch area where he would sit and tend the fire. There was an old fireplace poker hanging by that leather strap, and we use it to tend the fire, you know? Sometimes it was fun, especially if we had supervision, to leave the tip of the poker in the fire and to see it get red hot. You know, it's made of iron. I thought about using that wooden dowel to demonstrate the fireplace poker. And I don't know, you were too little going to visit that house. Sometimes I would stare at that poker. You know, I didn't like it. Along with that leather strap, I did not like it. And those things were there for years and years and years. That leather strap was there during your grandfather John's childhood. And yeah, his grandmother would use it on him. But the poker, we're going to use a yardstick. Because I don't really like yardsticks either, although I do use them as tools for cutting fabric and for measuring things. But these were also used as punishment when I went to the parochial school. Yes, they were. Yes, in the late 70s, early 80s. Along with a ping pong paddle. You know, the nuns would have holes drilled into the paddles. So when they would swing it, it'd go through the air quicker. They'd get more of a snap out of it when you get punished in school. Yeah, it did happen. But I'm at home. Jack is coming home from being out with his friends. There was a commotion and screaming upstairs. It was a nightmare. Jack had decided to punish Eddy. Apparently, and this was through all the screaming, and it ended up in the living room, I had to put my book down. I thought about going out and running and hiding, but it was too late. There was nowhere to go. The fighting commenced, and it was so loud the whole neighborhood must have heard it. Eddy had figured out how to find one of the skeleton keys to get into Jack's room. I don't know what he did in there. I don't know. But then, I guess he tried the key again, and the key broke. So Jack had to, I don't know, eventually take apart that whole lock mechanism to get in. Is awful. Jack cornered Eddy on the couch, and he grabbed the fireplace poker, and he beat Eddy so hard on his wound. Think he opened it up, because I look up at the mirror and I see a speck of blood. Is awful. One of the worst fights ever. And I was paralyzed with fear. Now, oftentimes, people ask me, how could you have loved your brother Eddy? Well, I tried. Even through all those awful moments, I tried to have endearment and empathy and forgiveness for him. You know? Through all those things, through all that bitterness and all that awfulness, Eddy was in so much pain. And Jack was going into the other room to grab something else, probably to beat him up some more. I reached out and I grabbed Eddy's hand. I could have ran away, you know. I could have ran away up to my room. I could have gone to somebody's house. But I felt like, what were they going to do for us? Nothing. I think at this point, some of the neighborhood may have had their suspicions of what was going on. But I think that kind of behavior was actually quite common. I grabbed Eddy's hand. We ran into the bathroom, where I knew how to lock the door. And Eddy was crying, and he was afraid. And he had a bleeding wound on his hip. I held him. And as Jack is trying desperately to open the door, and he couldn't, and he knew I was there, I had to threaten him that I was going to tell somebody that this was enough. And it's sad because Eddy was usually my rival. And growing up as a child, Jack was my hero. I saw it flip, you know? I saw the whole thing flip before my very eyes. I knew it was there. I knew Jack was changing. And I did not want to be on his side anymore. I didn't want to be on anybody's side there anymore. I was figuring myself out as a kid where I belonged in that family. And I think that was a turning point in my life as I brought up this situation to your grandfather later on in 1989 that I had had enough. And it's funny too, because during that time when I lived with my guardians in 1988, 89, and 90, my brothers would come and visit. I tolerated them. And the few people I told this story to, very few, or if I would bring up other stuff about them, people would just roll it off and set it aside, you know, including your aunt. And oftentimes I'd be too ashamed to talk. The person I did tell the whole detailed story to the next day was Rudy. And he understood. He understood what I was saying. And he was explaining to me, or trying to, that him and I both did not belong in that community. I wanted to belong at first, but it's a hard pill to swallow. It wasn't until after your grandmother had her heart attack that I realized enough is enough, because that was kind of the climax of the violence in the house. Maybe one of the climaxes. I don't know. But it left a mark on me. And it's a perfect story to tell you, especially during the time of Halloween, because I don't need to watch horror films I don't need anything to scare me, because I grew up with my own horse. I'm over it now, and texting with you and telling you what I was going to talk about here. I'm glad you're interested, and it's okay if you don't want to comment on this stuff. It's all right. I'm just glad you're interested, and I'm glad I'm bringing all this stuff up to surface now. Now you have a better perspective of the upbringing and the whole dynamics of that part of your family. All those fairy tales, all those stories, they were great for my brain in one way, but they did not explain why those things happen and how it's not just a family thing and it's not just a psychological thing. It has to do with class society and the dynamics of the family within class society, But I'll give you a quote here from Karl Marx that explains a lot of it. So here we go. The mode of production of material life determines the social, political, and intellectual life process in general. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their being, but on the contrary, their social being that determines their consciousness. There you go. Anyways, I gotta wrap up this video. I have been exercising more, which is really good for me, and then continuing to drink water. I made some cranberry water that I've been drinking a lot of. And then I've been spoiling myself, not only doing some special cooking, but I made a homemade facial scrub here. Yeah, bentonite clay and baking soda, and coconut oil. Fantastic stuff. Also, a little bit of cold cream. And then I've been making special lotions. So I have one here that has all kinds of different butters, besides cocoa butter. It's wonderful, mixed with some real vanilla and also some rose oil. In the next video, I may bring up another hero of mine, someone who I've read about, and maybe I should reread her. You might be interested in her. Her name was Rosa Luxemburg. She was born in Poland, but unfortunately she ended up being assassinated in Berlin. She was definitely a trailblazer in the working class struggle, not just for women, but for men too. But I gotta go now. I got a lot to do. And I told you too, I'm gonna learn some skills coming up here in a few days. I have a lot to do, only about 4 days left. Let's see how far I get. And keep doing what you're doing. Rest and remember, you're going to be fine. All of these new things that you're learning, it'll all, fall together just fine. It's all about learning new skills and memorization. You'll make it. I know you can, because, I don't know, your intelligence just blows my mind. Anyways, remember I love you, and tell your husband Tombo I love him too. And I'll talk to you later, sweetheart. Don't forget to ring the bell, okay? I'll probably put in the next video tomorrow for you. Let's see how it goes. Goodbye. Take care.